So peace is one of those words that's sort of like love. It can be pretty tricky to understand the depth of meaning it has, but we use it quite often. Have you ever heard, "I just need some peace and quiet"? Is peace something that we experience personally? Is peace something that we experience as a community? Is peace even possible? I'm willing to bet that if we polled all of you here today, all of you would give me some really great answers as to what peace is, but they probably wouldn't be all the same. Preparing for this, I was reading Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, to try to find an easy way to describe peace. And I found out that there really isn't an easy way to describe peace. I found out that these people had incredible insights. They were wise. It was great to read from them, but there wasn't a consensus, and sometimes there was a little bit of a contradiction. So then I decided to look at what the opposite of peace was. So I did what any good millennial would do. I went to my friendly neighborhood AI, ChatGPT, and I had it give me a list of the opposite of peace. And do you know what it came up with? Tension, turmoil, war, chaos, anxiety, and hostility. Each of these words reflect the absence of peace. Some of these concepts are feelings, they're actions, they're states of being. They can be personal. They can also involve entire nations. So first, I would like for us to explore personal peace. What does it mean to have peace like a river in my soul? It seems to me that each and every one of us experiences personal peace differently. So for example, I used to direct a VBS, and at the end of every night, at the closing time, we would have dance parties. So if you can imagine 50 children dancing, running around, doing the cha-cha, squealing with joy, it was something that brought me joy, but it also brought me peace. Because seeing that much joy in a church is something that I know would make God smile. But I also know that for some, maybe many, watching kids be loud and crazy is not always considered peaceful. So while some may experience peace with the stillness and the quiet of a hidden mountain pond at dusk, others may experience peace with the waves crashing against the beach. And for me, I experience peace with a lot of loud and dancing kids in church. So in seminary, I was doing my internship during the pandemic. And the church that I was serving did not quite have the infrastructure yet to stream their services like we do. So I decided to take on that challenge, to get all the equipment, figure out how to even begin to do live production, because that was not something that I was familiar with, and to try to update this infrastructure, which at one point it meant getting a 200-foot Ethernet cable, plug it into the office, and then run it down the hallway of the church into the middle of the sanctuary to a laptop where I had a camera set up. And you might imagine that trying to get this entire setup to work brought me a lot of anxiety. The first time I hit the on button and tried to get everything to work, I was worried that something would go wrong, that all of a sudden church wouldn't happen on Sunday. But a couple months went by, things went great. We were able to get the church service to happen, but another part of my internship was preaching. Even though I had worked in a church for 15 years previous to this, I had never preached. I had never done what I'm doing right now. So I got to go in front of this setup that I had just cobbled together and preach to an empty church building through a camera. It was not a normal type of preaching. So my routine went as normal. I would get there on a Saturday, make sure everything worked, check the internet, check that all of the programs were running as they should, and that Saturday went great. That Sunday rolled around, I got there 2 hours early, and all of a sudden, when I turned on everything, there was no internet connection. And internet is something that you need if you're streaming to the world. So I began going through everything, all of the equipment, all of the drivers, all of the programs, reinstalled everything, nothing worked. I felt all of the peace drained from my body, and it was replaced with anxiety and worry and panic. So I walked down the hallway, I went to the main office, and I realized that there wasn't any internet in the entire building. So then I walked downstairs into this sort of dark and dreary basement, found the utility room, and sure enough, there was an old router right there, and I thought with my IT brain, what are you supposed to do if something doesn't work if you're in IT? You turn it off and you turn it back on again. So that's what I did. And everything worked, and everything was great, and then I realized that I had to preach in 15 minutes. So I had to figure out how to find that place of peace again, how to get to that place where I was ready and able to bring the good news to everyone. So I went back to what I learned in seminary. There was this meditation called squared breathing. So it's where you breathe in for 7 seconds, you hold it. Then you release it for 7 seconds, then you hold it. And then you repeat this cycle over and over again. And you do this until a mindfulness sort of washes over you, and you feel peace. And for me, I did this until I felt like I had a firm foundation to preach from. And in the words of Maya Angelou, I learned that I might not control all the events that happen to me in that moment, but I can decide not to be reduced by them. So when our peace is taken from us, tension, anxiety, hostility replace it. And that can often happen without being aware of what's happening. It can come in like a storm. So in the scripture today, that very thing happened. A group of hardened, seasoned fishermen came onto these waters that they had been on multiple times. And all of a sudden a storm came, and they were filled with dread and panic. And at first read, I was wondering, why were they so afraid? This was their job. This is something they did. But I wonder how many of you here have ever been on a boat or on the water when a giant storm comes in. It can be a truly terrifying moment. For me, I was tubing down the river in high school, and my friend named Neil, who was a true adventurer, convinced me to do this. So we were tubing down this river, and I saw these giant clouds start to come over top of us. And in proper fashion, Neil says, "We can make it. It won't be a problem at all. We'll just sit on the river on our tubes and everything will be fine." Now, let me tell you a little bit about Neil. Neil, at the end of his college degree program, took all of his things, all of his belongings, threw them in his car, and drove west. He didn't have a job. He didn't have a place to live. He didn't have a point of contact. He just drove, and I found out later that he was a lumberjack at one point. He ended up in Alaska. I saw a picture of him on top of a tree that was covered in snow over a roaring river, using a chainsaw to cut it as he was sitting on it. So Neil was a risk taker. So he was the one that said, we can make it, it'll be fine. So we were sitting there, and the rain comes. And it's not just normal rain. These drops were enormous, and they hit the river so hard that when it splashed, it rained upward on us. We couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead of us. We were disoriented, and it felt like there were waves. And then I see Neil motion to all of us, saying, we need to get out of here as quick as we possibly can. And I see him paddle viciously towards the shore. See, there's something terribly disorienting about not being able to see, about feeling completely out of control. So I imagine that's how these fishermen felt. They were disoriented. They were not able to see. They were being thrown around in their little fishing boat. This can be like the metaphorical storms in our lives. An event can happen to us and take away our peace. It can be like the loss of a loved one. It can be the loss of a job. It can be an argument with a friend. Or it can be an argument with a stranger. Or it can be the internet cutting out right before the first time you have ever preached at a live stream only worship service. These are things that are out of our control that can disorient us. They can make us take a pause. And while these fishermen were navigating this storm, we have Jesus who's taking a nap during all of it, but still very much with them. And then they remember they have Jesus, the one who does miracles, the one who is leading them through all of their adventures and journeys. So they wake Jesus up, and Christ rebukes the winds and brings about a dead calm. In moments of crisis, we can be so consumed with what's happening, we can be so disoriented that we can forget that God is always with us. The presence of God does not stop storms from coming, but when we need help, we can always know that God is with us, that we can ask God for help, and that God can calm storms. And after this storm, God can be with us as we mourn the loss. Is peace a fruit of the Spirit that we only experience personally, or is it something that we experience in a greater community as well? Is it something that we can strive for as a church? In Matthew, we are called to be peacemakers. The PCUSA has a movement that embraces the work of peacemaking named Matthew 25. This movement has 3 pillars. Those pillars are building congregational vitality, dismantling structural racism, and eradicating systemic poverty. This is a PCUSA movement that asks congregations to consider these things for the work of peacemaking. So peacemaking can be hard, and it should not be confused with peacekeeping. Peacekeeping often works to avoid and prohibit conflict from surfacing. When peacemaking draws out the embedded conflict for the purpose of equitable resolutions. Ash K. Rajmar, author and pastor, describes it like this. Peacekeeping is when we keep our feelings suppressed, we keep our thoughts repressed, and we keep our tongues stuck to the roof of our mouths because we might say the wrong thing and end up in an unwanted conflict. Peace does not assume the absence of conflict. Unity comes from making peace out of conflict. Peacemaking is often ugliness that leads to beauty. Peacemakers walk the difficult way of grace and truth. Or another short way to describe this is something that John Lewis said. It's get into good trouble. We need to be able to identify the elephants in the room and begin the challenging and sometimes painful process of removing the elephant to make space for the new ways to spread Christ's love. It's important to engage in the work providing for the hungry, providing for the thirsty, giving clothes to those who need it, welcoming the stranger, visiting those in the hospital, and visiting those in jail. There are so many ways for us to engage in this work, and Derry has ministries for you to do so. We already have clothing drives. We already have built homes, both in the Veterans Village and in the Dominican Republic. We offer a free community meal. And we also do a whole lot more than that. And I also wonder, with all of you here, if there are any new ideas for us to engage in this good work. You see, when we take on the call of peacemaking, we are taking on the challenging work of resolving conflict in systems. And this reminds me of something that Desmond Tutu says. There comes a point when we need to stop pulling people out of the river, and we need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. Our personal peace and our call to be peacemakers are two sides of the same coin. They feed each other and are inseparable. If we only focus on our personal peace and disregard the work of peacemaking, then that will create a tension with how we are created to be in a community. If we do not advocate for others to thrive, then we are ignoring the call of being a peacemaker. But in the same way, if we only care about helping others and do not do the work in finding our own personal peace with Christ's help, we will not be effective in the work that we aspire to achieve. If we are not at peace, we are disoriented. Our visibility is compromised. When we do the work of peacemaking while working from a mindful and centered place of peace, we are capable of supporting others and engaging in conversations that may uncover conflict but will eventually lead to beauty. Amen.